Welcome back to Finding the Edge podcast. I'm Garrett Boyum, joined with Kyle Dupick. And so today we wanted to cover results versus process, being process oriented. And my initial thought process too on some of this is I even think like there's another dichotomy of being like data driven versus, I don't even know, like what would be the opposite of that? But that's like the common thing today. What would you say? Like, what are they contrasting with it? Like not data,
Yeah.
like
Maybe more so, or like not exactly by the gut, but a little bit, like making decisions, not on the eye test, but a little bit more based on experiences and what you see and what you feel.
And so for me, where I think I want to move the conversation, and I think Michael O'Connell, who used to work at Driveline, kind of put out something similar. He wrote a blog post on it. I'll see if I can pull this up here while I try to talk about it. But basically, where I think the game needs to move next is being more principled based, because data by itself is not self-interpreting. Somebody needs to interpret the data. Somebody needs to analyze the data. How are you going to analyze the data? That requires some sort of philosophy or some sort of principles in order to actually make the data useful.
Let's begin. Analyzing. Finding the edge.
And so to me, it's not just about, okay, I collect data or whatever. It's about what questions am I asking of the data? What is informing the questions that I'm asking of the data? How am I analyzing it? How am I breaking it down? How am I reading it? And then how am I applying it? So to me, where things need to move is towards more of a principle-based approach. And then from there, then that kind of starts to weave into like what we're talking about, process versus results-based. But to loop back to the principled thing, the reason that for me is like your principles are your logic. They're how you rationalize everything that you do. And so for me, when it comes down to, all right, if I'm doing something like it's process oriented or whatever, okay, so what's my process and what's the theory behind it? What's the thought process behind it? And so if I'm taking this from like an ecological perspective, if I'm thinking about it from, or rather not just thinking about it from an ecological perspective, let's back up a little bit. So for me, my framework, my principles are largely going to be based out of ecological dynamics. And so from there, now we get into like process oriented versus result. For me, the process is, for a while, I really hated this whole notion of like, oh, just trust the process. It's like, okay, but if the process isn't getting any results, then how long are we going to trust the process before we start adjusting things? And so for me, what the ecological approach has done is help me kind of come back to, okay, what are the results? Like when I'm doing my analysis, okay, I'm looking at, okay, what is the functional outcomes that I'm looking for? And then if I work backwards from there, okay, how do I create a process that basically achieves that? And so, but I start with the results. Like, what are the results that I'm looking to get? And then what type of process do I need to? So for me, it's the two actually need to work together, but it's not just process over everything, and it's rather my process is informed by the results. And so I'm going to make adjustments based upon my principles. And then that's actually going to be what my process is going to be based around my principles. So maybe I'm explaining like something very basic and duh and obvious, but I think that needs to be said a little bit more. Kyle, what are your initial thoughts on kind of this seemingly what is being presented as a dichotomy, which I don't really think needs to be the case, but how do you kind of see things?
Yeah, I don't think anybody could disagree with you that starting with the results, working backwards to see are the processes that I'm taking part in leading to said results. I think that as we speak, it is pretty much obvious. It seems like, and I could be mistaken here, but it seems like where the dichotomy comes between those is when somebody is focused on results, say in a game, or that they become consumed with not getting the results that they're looking for. And so we're trying to get them to stick to the process that would lead to said results, but they're becoming very results oriented or results driven, as opposed to focusing on the processes that sort of they can control, that are within their, because like if you hit a ball in the screws and you hit it right at somebody, like you have to have some semblance of peace with that at times, because that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And if you stick to that and you do that over and over, same thing. If you make a good pitch and the guy just gets a hit, like that's baseball. Sometimes that just happens. If you get too far on the results oriented side, you can go mad and you can start to make yourself worse. And you've seen that a lot. And so it seems like that's the dichotomy is when somebody gets too sort of hung up on the results instead of the process that leads to the results.
I guess for me, my thought there is thinking about it from an ecological perspective and what we've said in the past, that it's all about relationships. So for me, it becomes, okay, how does this result or this event that happened in the game, where does it sit, in perspective to the larger picture? Okay, so like a one-off event, no big deal. Okay, but if this keeps happening and I keep making good pitches and they keep hitting it, they keep getting hits, then the question becomes, all right, maybe we actually need to make adjustments. Maybe they aren't good pitches, right? And so it's a delicate balance, because for the athlete playing the game, right, the coach is trying to distill stuff down to make it so that the athlete can be successful and not overthink it. But at the same point, we have to educate the athlete, and part of the growth process is learning. And this is what also, because one of our sophomores is struggling. Obviously, like this happens to almost all teams. Like even where I'm following Missouri State, where I used to coach a little bit as a GA, and watching one of their like top guys like struggle having come back, and like he was like on a draft board, all this sort of stuff and whatever. And I think sometimes it's a question of like, okay, what happened, And I think for all of us, we sometimes don't recognize some of the things that make us good. Like I look at some things, like for example, with our sophomore that's struggling, is I think he's just a little bit too casual. Like, he's not trying to make a big deal out of anything. And so all of a sudden, his arousal level is not at the level optimal for him to perform at his best. And so like this kind of comes back to like what we talked about in the last episode, or our recent episode on intention, right? His intention, his global intention or focus, or his focus of attention or intention, which I think these things are not necessarily the same, but are very closely linked. But he's basically in this mindset of like, I'm just going to stay really chill and like, it doesn't matter, And then that leads you to a place where all of a sudden now it does matter, and now you're behind, and you're still behaving in the same way, and now you're not making the adjustment, not realizing that mentality piece is the part, And so for me, that's why that's foundational. But to get back to this whole process element is, to me, the process needs to stay in relationship to what is currently going on. So it becomes a question of like, okay, yeah, he made a good, tip your cap to the other guy. He made a really great play. Had a really good hit. He executed his pitch really well. He got me on that one. But then you need to spend a moment and sit there and reflect for a second of like, okay, next time, is there something I could have done differently? Is there something else that's going on in the environment that I can, or within the game? Is there something else going on within the game that I can actually exploit to get the results that I need to get? And it might take time. Like we have to always understand, like, of course, it's not always going to happen right away. Let's say you give up 2 hits. All right. But can you, now that you're getting to that second or third hit, can you start to find, and through like process of elimination, Like be like, okay, maybe actually I need to start mixing some things up here, going to something that actually wasn't working earlier, but now actually there's an opening for that. Maybe I wasn't able to land my third pitch very well, but now maybe it's time to mix that in there. Or maybe I was throwing a lot of breaking balls, and now it's time to go back more fastballs. Or maybe I need to attack a different part of the zone. Just all sorts of things. I mean, this is something I think you've kind of talked about before, Kyle, is, all right, I pitch a guy a certain way, and then all of a sudden I come back to what they were hunting, and then they weren't ready for it. Right. And so it's kind of the same thing of like, sometimes we have to be dynamic and also remember that the game itself is dynamic. And so sometimes you have to circle back. I mean, once you like, in the past, like, I know when I caught, it was like, man, we threw everything in the kitchen sink at this guy and I still am struggling to figure out how to get him out. And then maybe at that point, it's time to like circle back on some things.
Yeah. I think you point out something there, various things in there, but the one that shines brightest through is from an ecological standpoint. We are most concerned with how often we get a little bit drunk on looking at the athlete instead of the athlete embedded in the environment. And I think where process can fail, and what you just drew out there, is that when process is all about the athlete and not the athlete connected to the environment, then what's going to happen is you, as a hitter, say you're going to have a certain approach. Well, maybe that approach will work, heck, for the whole series, or just for that game, or maybe just that at bat, or maybe just that pitch. But you're not open and sensitive to how the environment is changing. Same as a pitcher. And so if your process to get the results you want is not also connecting you to the what is actually going on in the environment that you're embedded in, and how is it changing dynamically? Even something as simple as was watching some scouting film for some opponents that we're playing. So initially look at the data, then pull up some video, and just watching every single ball this guy, or every swing this guy has. And then one game it pulls up and it's just pouring. Like it is raining cats and dogs. And it's like, this is a totally different environment. And like any information I take from here has to take that into account, that it is absolutely pouring and some of the opportunities for action are going to be different because it's raining, and that's a different environment. And so I think, just to underscore that again, if your process never changes, it's going to run into problems because the environment is always dynamic and changing.
Yeah. And I was just thinking about how, okay, so another good principle to kind of lay out here that's ecological is skill is a search. Okay. So when we're stuck in this kind of battle where we feel like, the advantage is on the other team, the big thing is that the athlete can't give up. Rather, we need to enable or empower them to keep searching. Right. And I know some coaches don't love this whole notion of like, oh, you shouldn't be searching for answers when you're out there playing. But it's like, okay, well, when the answer that you've given isn't working, then now you need to start to search. But it's not a I'm lost in a panic search.
Yeah.
It's a strategic, I am competing. It's a competitive search. And that's very different, where you're competing, you're looking for an advantage. Right. Like, and so this is where like skill is a search. What we're saying is that we're looking for a competitive search, not I'm out there just trying different things in the middle of the game and like just searching for like my release point and this and that. It's like, no, we're not, or like mechanics or whatever. We're not out there searching, but rather we're searching for an advantage to get us to have success, to get the results that we're looking for. And once we've found the results, then we're just going to play and we're going to execute, with the with the first best available. And that's another key to actually transition a little bit. Okay, now let's talk about decision making from an ecological perspective, because I think this is, to me, like key. In the traditional model, we see this with hitting, especially. It's like, okay, we're gonna do decision making training. All right, I want you to tell me it's a ball or a strike. And you sit there and you work on like your strike zone awareness or whatever. Well, especially at the collegiate level and lower. Okay, and once you get up into the professional levels, maybe some of the higher levels of Division I baseball, but I don't know how good all the umpires are at Division I. It still seemed like there's a bit of a play there, but you have to understand that the strike zone is not what you see on TrackMan or whatever, your Rapsodo, whatever it is. Like that's not real. Like that's not the real strike zone. The real strike zone is what the umpire calls. That's the real strike zone.
Unfortunately.
Right. Well, for better or for worse, but that's just the reality of the game. And so how can you train strike zone awareness if you're doing it based upon some sort of shape, whether it's, whether it's the coach's true zone that doesn't have a catcher in there, there's no umpire. So like for me, that's where, okay, number one, there's a flaw in our decision, or our decision training. I think it works right now because there's an inefficiency, right? Like the game isn't as challenging at the lower levels, right? If you can execute on some basic things, right? The ball's in the middle of the zone, you're going to have better, 100%. But what happens when you get the umpire that's calling 3 balls off the plate? And the pitcher doesn't really throw that many in the middle. Okay, so you're banking your whole game on the fact that we got to get the 5 pitches that happen to go middle, end up in the middle of the zone or whatever that is, right? Yep. You're banking your whole game on that and hoping to get lucky on the other stuff, right? So I think that's where, in my mind, I think and I believe that I should be able to train our guys so that I don't have to hope that we're gonna maybe get something. We're gonna be able to perform and do something that we've never trained before, or that we haven't trained.
This is where you're saying skill as a search is such a good thing, because taking your umpire example, if you're searching for something that is a functional fit to the environment that you're currently embedded in, and how often have you heard, like when I heard you say skill as a search at the beginning, and then as you started to unpack it, I immediately thought of like a coach yelling at an athlete, make an adjustment, right? Like, and that's what we want our athletes to do. And that's like, maybe you'd call that old school or whatever, but that's what this is. They're searching for a way to exploit the current situation. And if you're never training that, if you're never, I've actually noticed that a little bit, in my own, a lot of times I'll sit behind and chart our lives, and it's hard because sometimes I'll try to, like the way our catchers call balls and strikes will be right on the corners, but that's not how it's called in the game. And when I'm calling it, I'm more privy to give the strike at the belt because it's actually a strike. It's almost never called in the game. The high strike is very rarely called. And so it's just such a good reminder that, if the batters are trained to have this perfect strike zone based on what the rule book says, and I would really like it if that was adhered to, but it's not, to your point. And so that's where skill as a search is not me just aimlessly looking, but instead it's me searching for what will fit that game. And again, going back to our training environments, how are we preparing them for that? Or are our training environments so stale, so rote, that they're never prepared to make that adjustment that they need to in order to get the hit, to get the result we want? To go back to this process thing, how are our processes leading to the results we want? Well, if our processes aren't helping us be adaptable to the environment, then they're not very good processes, which is why I appreciate your principle of skill being a search, as opposed to maybe having one of our principles even if you got more down into the pitching and the hitting side of it, being like something much more specific that would be baseball language, that's not really what we're talking about. We're trying to stay connected to the environment in our search for a functional fit or a functional solution.
Yeah. And I think one other words that I throw in there as part of the search process, like we had talked about previously, is attunement, right? So becoming attuned previously is attunement, right? So becomes difficult. We've all had those umpires where it's like, okay, the ball is 3 balls off, ball. Ball is 3 balls off again, strike.
Yeah.
And it happens to come in the worst situation. And sometimes, like, because this, I'll go back and I'll look at our hitters' results. Like if I see a guy strike out or whatever, I go, okay, where was that pitch? And I'll go back and I'll look at our game data, and I'll queue up the video, and I'll even see where flight scope had it and whatever, and I'll go back and I'll look and I'll go, okay, yeah, that was 3 balls off, or that was inside, that was off the plate. And you go, okay, you know what? That's okay, unless I've gotten evidence that was a consistent pattern, then I can be upset about it with an athlete. But if it's like, okay, he called out a ball earlier in the at bat, I totally understand why you would take that pitch.
Yeah.
And so there's some of that of like, so this actually comes back to, I want to now loop back to decision making and what some of the literature within ecological dynamics has kind of the way that they think about things. It's not a binary yes, no. It is how people make decisions. Comes back to, you're not picking the most optimal. You're picking the first best available for your intention. Okay, whatever your intention is, whatever your goal is, you're going to pick the first available thing that you see that's going to lead to whatever your intention is. So, and sometimes our intentions are not the right intentions. Like if all I want to do is I want to get away from a person, let's say I'm playing football or whatever, or some sort of invasion sport, and I actually need to be more aggressive to go through a hole, right? Instead of looking for a hole to exploit to go towards my target, instead I run myself away from this person and they push me into a non-optimal space, right? So it just happened to be that like my intention wasn't most optimal. And so I just kind of think about that of like, sometimes like, for example, like let's use a baseball one. For a hitter, my intention was to be defensive when I should have been more aggressive, right? Like I was in more of a defensive mindset. And so then that changed what I perceived was hittable or whatever, or then my action capability there just wasn't as good. And so for me, that's where, okay, our decision making, when we actually queue something up, when we're thinking about, okay, from the training environment, all right, and what I'm doing is actually, number one, is it coupled to the action that they're going to actually be required to do? So a lot of mistakes that I see, or that I would say that are maybe less than ideal, even based upon some of the research, is doing declarative, calling it out, ball, strike, or fastball, curveball, like pitch identification. I don't think any of that matters, because when you look at the research, there's the dorsal stream and I think it's the ventral stream within the brain, and they control different parts. So like decision-making or verbalizing something is a completely different part of the brain. I think it's in the ventricle, and then the dorsal is more your action. So to be able to hit something, you don't necessarily need to cognitively recognize curveball. You just need to perceive where that ball is in space. And then to be able to move your body in such a way that you're going to intercept this or like hit the ball, right? So that's where that doesn't matter. That like those are two different pathways that your body is using, and they don't necessarily overlap. So that's where, for me, it's actually less about, okay, can I recognize it, but rather can my behavior and my action be correct for what is going on in that situation? So it kind of comes back to this whole, you need to keep your perception and your action coupled. So that's what I would say when you're starting to do this. So for example, for me, in an ideal world, when it comes to hitters, and this is even true for pitchers, It'd be good to have one, if we're just talking hitters, it'd be good to have an umpire back there. And so as a coach, you can be the umpire. And what I would do is I've created some activities where it's like, okay, I want the hitter to become attuned to the umpire's zone. Okay, so now you can start doing some things where you're calling balls and strikes, and maybe your zone today is actually a little bit higher. So that's going to change a hitter's behavior and what pitches they may need to swing at. Might not be their ideal, but like, okay, now they get to a 2-strike count. All right, now they may have to swing at a ball that's up. That's going to change also too on the pitching side. Like, okay, now it makes you more susceptible to a curveball, right? So if I have a big looping curveball, it's getting called high, or it's landing in whatever. Okay, that opens you up to the fastball up, right? And chasing a fastball out of the zone. Vice versa, right? If you get calls that are lower in the zone, okay, now you're going to start probably chasing balls, like breaking balls that are breaking out of the zone. You're going to get more chase, right? But if those don't get called, it's easier to spit on those breaking balls that start lower, and just lay off those, because if it's a fastball and I'm wrong, it's probably going to get called a ball. So that's where all of a sudden the umpire plays a big role in the decision making that a hitter is going to have to do. So that would be one activity that I would, encourage people to do, is like, well, and I thought this was really cool. When we go up to play UMD in the fall, usually I think the umpires that we have, more often than not, are just players. So it's like some guys like already want to be umpires. They umpire in the summer, whatever. Like, I would get some of your players involved in being umpires and getting back there and calling balls and strikes and working on that. And that would be good for your own players as well to now start to attune to that. Then what I would do, especially if they're my own players, is I'd be like, okay, today I want you to give more of the inside part of the plate. Or today I want you to give more on the outside. Or I want you to give more up. I want you to give more down. Right? And then just try to have the guys try to figure out, okay, what's the umpire's zone? Right? And so guys start becoming attuned to that. The other thing that I think is interesting when it comes to attuning to the zone is that it actually, the pitcher and the arm angle and the approach angles of the ball, I think dictate to some of the zone. Because for an umpire, some umpires see some guys better than others, right? So all of a sudden that was being called a ball before, but all of a sudden a guy who's a side armor, or a submarine guy comes in, and all of a sudden that low pitch that wasn't being called a strike before is now getting called a strike, as an example, right? And so then again, hitters need to actually be able to recalibrate or become attuned to the new zone for the current pitcher. So each pitcher may have a different zone. So I think these are important things that guys, especially at the collegiate level or lower, these are skills that need to be developed and can be developed if you create and design practices around that.
It underscores the importance too of whatever activity you're doing, allowing there to be multiple at-bats, multiple reps that are separated by time, a group who's rotating through so that they can start to become attuned to where the strike zone is, right? It's not probably going to happen right away. I think the other cool opportunity that opens up is, what do you see happen during the game so often? Hitters coming back, talking, this is what his pitch mix is. This is what the umpire did. What don't you often see during batting practice? That, right? Because they know it's going to be the same thing every day. It's always going to be the same strike zone. What a great way to make the challenge point of batting practice harder, to help the search of the pitcher in a live side that they're doing much better, because now they're searching for different solutions because they know this zone is off limits and that zone is open, and it wasn't open the last time I threw a live side. That's even a different way that you can manipulate the constraint of the essentially the rules of the game, right? What the umpire is calling. And I think this all loops back to what we started with: process versus results. We start with the results. What do we want? We want guys to get get on base. We want guys to get the next guy up. We want them to get hits, or we want our pitchers to get outs. How do we do that? We do have these processes, but as you've identified, they need to be connected to principles. And so why are we talking about decision-making and changing the umpire strike zone? Well, because if your process, as we've identified over and over, cannot adapt to the changing environment, such as an umpire, then that process will eventually fail you. And it'll probably fail you in really important times, because you've not been trained to adapt your process to get the result you want. And then ultimately it's a process that it might work for some times getting the result you want, but it doesn't have the width and the breadth of being able to give you the results you want over all sorts of situation. And isn't it Nikolai Bernstein's quote, like a motor solution? I'm going to butcher the quote. Is one that fits the problem like a key perfectly fits the lock. And if your process is not perfectly fitting that situation, then it's not fitting it like a key fits a lock. It's meant for a different lock, and now you're kind of stuck, potentially getting stuck in the results because you're not getting them you want, and then maybe hitting your head against the wall as you try to stick to a process that honestly is just never a functional fit for the problem that you were embedded in. And one thing I at least wanted to mention that I wrote down early as well, when you're thinking about process versus results, one of the beautiful parts about ecological dynamics is that we are trying to also connect with the individual, who they currently are. And so questions about like, where is the athlete at in their own personal journey? I've had athletes that I've coached in the past, that I coach right now, who really get overwhelmed with the results and define themselves very much by the results. And so they actually need to be more connected to the process, because that's something that kind of disconnect them from the what the result speaks about their value or worth. I've had other athletes who don't get the results they want. They maybe get squeezed by the umpire. It's maybe a bloop base hit. A lot of things that like they had pretty good processes, but they'll come off the field, and just because they're at a different place in their journey, in their career, they'll just go, yeah, I just stunk today. I need to get that guy out. And they can handle that. And that's different. And so I think that's really important. Where's that athlete at in their journey? What do they need in terms of this process result being informed together? And who are they as a person, just personality wise? You spoke about that early. I think that those are also really important things to consider, that we're not just talking about process versus results. Again, that's a one size fits all for everybody. It also has to be a fit for who that person is on their athlete journey, in their maturity as a person, how their personality kind of fits. You and I have probably both coached guys who are super serious all the time, super laid back. Those different guys are probably going to need to be thinking differently about process versus results in slightly different ways as well. So taking the athlete and who they are in mind as well is really important.
Right. And as I was thinking about it, when it comes to like my process, I'm thinking about, okay, for me, if I want adaptable athletes that are problem solvers, there's a process that you can run that helps you achieve that. But at the same point, like we had talked about in skilled intentionality about heuristics, right? A good heuristic, or you're giving a clear goal, helps orient that process. So what I see, for example, I think you kind of talked about this with or you've experienced this and you're mentioning this. Like, okay, we keep hitting the ball on the screws, but we keep getting outs. It's like, okay, well, you can chalk that up to, all right, yeah, we did good. Or it's like, okay, maybe we actually need to make an adjustment here. Okay, maybe we need to hit the ball on the ground. Maybe we need to try to go to the four hole. Maybe we need to try to, hit the ball to a different part of the field. Whatever it is, right? So sometimes this comes back to, again, the training piece. Like, so I think, I've mentioned this before. I think on the pitching side, it's a little bit easier, right? You can develop more pitches. Okay. So if you have more pitches in your toolbox, you can make more adjustments. You can go to you can try different things, right? If hitters are basically most often just trained to get their A swing off. So then okay, you got your A swing off and you're hitting it into, 40-mile-an-hour winds blowing straight in, and the ball is just going straight to guys. Like, well, okay, so then what, right? So to me, Rob Gray more recently put out, this article on, or this journal article on doing things the wrong way to enhance skill acquisition or player development. And so in it, basically, you intentionally try to hit the ball to the shortstop, or you intentionally try to hit the ball foul, and what all this, and none of this is brand new, right? You've heard of Joey Votto literally trying to hit the ball straight into the opposing team dugout, or like the opposite dugout, and so, yeah, guys have been doing this. Now, what's different though is Votto was always trying to do that. The question was he ever trying to pull it foul to the pull side? Right? And this is kind of where I'm going with this, is that can you develop the skill of trying to hit the ball to where you want on the field? Now, there is Votto talks about, this is the message that wasn't getting taught during the fly ball revolution, wasn't being said about most pro guys. Most pro guys can hit the ball wherever they want on the field to begin with. I don't know that it's 100% true, but like, I've heard stories of like Torrey Hunter off the tee. The dude could hit the ball wherever he wanted, right? Off the tee is different than, the ball being thrown and all that sort of stuff. But the guy's ability to make adjustments, like I could see that when he was playing at Minnesota, guys would, all right, prove it to me. So you look terrible on the slider. All right, you get another slider. Still look bad, fall it off, getting another slider. And then on that third one, bam, ball's hit out of the yard, right? So his ability to make adjustments is elite. And this is kind of the thing, is like, are we training our guys to just have one solution, or are we training our guys to actually be able to make adjustments to what is currently going on in the game? And from my personal experience, if you're going to try to do that, you really have to build a culture around that. If you want that to succeed, you have to build a culture around that. Otherwise, if it's just a message, which has been kind of more my experience of like, yeah, I mean, it's the drum I beat this year, I still don't think it resonates with guys, because the practice environment doesn't, or their own practice environments that they're doing isn't really conducive to that. Because if you start thinking about like most practice environments, they don't represent the game. Oh, you get 6 swings, or I just want to keep hitting the ball and I want to hit line drive after line drive after line drive. And it's like, when in the game do you ever do that? And like, okay, great, you can do that. Like, because now you start thinking about it, it's like, okay, I don't know, now you're fatigued. Well, that's why you're not hitting as well. Or like, you didn't even have time to process to be able to make an adjustment. You're just in so go mode. When do you have a second to like clear your thoughts, your nervous system to do something different? And so like, that's where I think a lot of the, I'm not against like high-paced practice, but are you creating space? If you're doing a high-paced practice, are you creating space for guys to make adjustments? Because if you are a go, it's really hard while you're in motion to change directions if you're going really fast, And so that to me is where, okay, how do we help guys slow down to be able to speed up and to make adjustments faster? And so I think you actually have to create space for that, and then you have to have a culture around that in order to actually really get that to take, because otherwise everything else is working against you, because just our natural predisposition is to just, I'm going to get back in there. I'm going to go again. I'm going to go again. And you're not really thinking about, okay, what adjustment do I really need to make here? Rather, you're just like, I need to get a different result. Going back to like, all right, there is a process by which you actually can figure out what adjustment do I need to make through a series of questions generally, right? Of like, okay, what happened there? If we're talking about it from a hitting standpoint, there's a couple basic questions. It's like, okay, where did I miss? If I didn't hit it the way I wanted to, where did I miss? Where did the ball go? If I fouled it off, okay, where did it go? If I'm over or under, am I early, late? All these things inform what type of adjustment I need to make, and it's a question of like, then you ask yourself like, okay, is it a physical thing or is it a mental thing? Was I focusing on the right thing? How convicted was I to that? how committed to whatever it was, my intention, my focus, whatever it was I wanted to do there, how committed. I think that plays a big role. Even from personal experience, like one time we were doing like a hit-a-thon or whatever, and I went through everything. And I've struggled a lot, and I was like, okay, I'm not going to give in. So it's like a question of like, okay, I literally went through all the things and I still missed, and it's like, and I thought about it. It's like, yeah, but I wasn't really committed to that adjustment. I was like, I'm going to sell out for that, because at least then that way I know for sure, like, all right, we're moving on after this if this doesn't work. And I hit the best ball the whole day, just went all in on that adjustment. And so that taught me, like, sometimes it's just a conviction piece. Like, you just weren't, there was still a little bit of fear. You're like, because I remember, when I used to play, I was like, okay, I don't want to miss high, but I also don't want to throw it on the ground. So I got to be like in the middle. And then all of a sudden you're just like, you didn't really commit to the adjustment.
Yep.
And being like, you know what, if I miss low, so what? Right. But instead you felt like you had to be perfect. So then you really never committed to the actual adjustment that you need, that you were trying to make there. So that's,
do you think that there's some, they've talked about, Rob's talked about, maybe hypothesize is the wrong word, about some of the internal cueing maybe not working, being sort of freezing degrees of freedom there. Do you think a lack of commitment might have something similar going on there, where you're sort of freezing yourself, freezing your all sorts of degrees of freedom, not just your motor system, right, but your perceptually what you're connected to and picking up, cognitively, those different things, how all those things, perceptions, cognitions, and actions are all intertwined. Do you think when you're not fully committed to an adjustment that there's some freezing going on for an athlete as well, or do you think something different is going on?
Yeah, I mean, well, here's what I saw today. One group of hitters, you could tell their intent was way too low. Like, they were just trying to be super easy, and they couldn't square up a ball at all. Flaring stuff off, swinging through it, fouling it off, whatever, hitting lazy fly balls, weak ground balls, all this sort of stuff rolling over. And that's like, everybody talks about like, oh yeah, just be easy. And it's like, no, because if you think about it, right? Like, what happens if I'm super relaxed? Oh, you just need to be relaxed. This is what I personally found is like, well, then you just think about this for a second. If you relax all your muscles, just go 100% limp, what's going to happen? You'll fall on the ground, right? Like, so when you think about it, like, I'm trying to hit the ball with the bat. If I go really relaxed, the bat's just going to flop all over the place. So no wonder you're mishitting it. When you go to swing it, the barrel is going to move a little bit more on you before it starts going wherever you're trying to put it. So it's like, this is where it's like, some of our messaging doesn't make any sense, right? If you want to pull something, right? And I want to pull something that's kind of heavy or firm, like, I got to pull the tension out of it and I got to pull it firm or hard, right? I don't need to go super loose and then just try to yank. Like, there's this middle ground, and that's actually where, coming back to like the intention piece and the commitment of like, okay, I'm going to move here. I'm going to move with conviction and intent, right? So I think back to Bruce Lee when he did an interview with, I think it's Piers, I can't remember. But anyways, it's famous interview that he did. And he talks about like, you need to train yourself to be like, when I want to hit, when I want to hit, I'm going to hit. If I'm going to move, I'm going to move somewhere. Right. And so it's that kind of that same commitment of like, my intent matches, but the intensity doesn't need to be like 110%. It doesn't need to be 100. Right? You can move with firm conviction that has flow, right? Like a hose that's spraying out water and it's firm, right? Like this, I think about this when we talk about like throwing, right? You don't need to huck the ball over to first base at 100 miles an hour. You just need to be smooth and firm. The ball just needs to be firm and not like light and floppy. It just needs to go over there firm. It doesn't need to go over there at like the max speed possible. Right. And so like that intensity is probably, that's going to be a sub-max intensity. That could be 96% effort. It could be 80% effort. It could be 75% effort. I don't think most people have the best efficiency at 75% effort, but it's where is the efficiency, right? And so for me, that to kind of try to wrap this, you actually want to pull the tension out of the system, right? So once I pulled the tension out of the system, that, go back to this idea of calibration, right? The mapping is 1-to-1, right? If I have some slack in the system, there's going to be a little bit of lag, and there's going to be some slippage as far as like where it is that I'm intending to move and to go. So if you pull out the slack out of the system, you pre-tension the system, right? Like a cheetah that's, going to pounce, right? It's not super wound up, but you can see there's some little bit of tension that's being created, and it's basically pulling out the slack. And this has been talked about a long time ago, but basically that's what we're saying is like, it doesn't mean choke the crap out of the bat. It doesn't mean squeeze and muscle up. It just means preparing, pre-tensioning the system for action. That's it. So I just want to throw that out there of like, everybody talks about like, oh, you just need to be loose and relaxed. And it's like, when you've been so wound up, you relaxing is basically putting you at the right tension. But for the guy that's literal like me, that only understands things in its extreme, it's like, okay, I'm going all the way relaxed. And it's like, well, that don't work. So I'm going to go all the way tight. Well, that don't work. So then the reality lies somewhere in the middle, or rather you have to figure that out for yourself.
That's what I've noticed, is that when we're talking about guys, whatever language we're using, tension, aggression, looseness, fluidity, all those things, for most guys, the initial search is for a right answer that helps them feel and kind of connect to who they are, an optimal level of looseness and tension. And when am I creating tension, and where am I creating tension? But then as you start to peel back the layers, well, different pitches have different, places where you're going to hold tension, right? Like different pitch shapes, different situations are going to call for different levels of tension as well. And to your point, if it's the biggest game of the year and my heart is going to jump out of my chest, like I'm going to need to like relax a little bit, take some deep breaths, not make it bigger than it is. And so I think that there's that initial search that a lot of athletes do that I've seen for my pitchers, but then there's also the constant search based on, again, just the environment and what's going on, because I think that's has to be spoken. Again, we are trying to create adaptable and adjustable athletes, regardless of the situation that they're in. It's actually one of the reasons why I'm not sure if you ever heard of, interacted with Anders Ericsson's book, Peak. Did you ever hear of that?
I think I've heard of it. I don't know if I've read it.
It was like early on in my coaching journey, it was floating around a lot of the spaces that I was reading. And he tried to go study all sorts of really cool things, like people who were experts in violin and cab drivers that, the GPS didn't work. And it was fascinating stuff. From an ecological standpoint, there's been some, I think, warranted criticism of it, but also I think that there's been not an appreciation of some of the cool things it had to say, and whether or not the language is right and all that. The one piece that I always took away from it that I really appreciated was his sort of starting point of the book was the body wants to seek out an equilibrium. It wants sort of comfort, so to speak. And so when you have this input, it's going to change the system, and the system is then going to find this new equilibrium. And so the point is, if you want peak performance, you're going to constantly have to change the equilibrium. Well, what I now, with a more ecological standpoint, am hearing and essentially say is like, oh, so we just need to constantly learn to adapt and adjust. Yes, of course. Like that is a key principle that we're trying to put here, and I think other people are seeing that in other ways. It's a great book. Again, there's a lot of stuff. He actually passed away from cancer. It was pretty sad. I'd been in email contact with him because he had, I read it while my wife was going through medical school, and he had some sections in there about how physicians are worse at their job 20, 30, 40 years in.
And I've heard that too.
And his mind was basically just like, the reason is because he gave a lot of different reasons, but I think it was one of these, like the sort of equilibrium of what you've created. You've seen the same thing every day, et cetera. you're not getting stretched anymore. Whereas when my wife was coming out of medical school and residency, she had been really stretched and created these new equilibriums of knowledge and experience and all these things coming together. And so he was trying to figure out new ways to train physicians that was not sit in a seminar. And so I had actually emailed him about that a couple of times, like, hey, have you thought of anything, even just ways that you could get immediate feedback about whether or not the thing that you were prescribing or doing was working, systems that would be more interactive like that to train people. That was a big part of the book in Peak. I think he called it deliberate practice, just this thing that has a clear goal. I hear intention there, and that has feedback. It's telling you something, which is going back to what we're kind of talking about here. Like, there's a result. What does the result tell you? And how does that result then come back? And again, there's a lot of stuff in there that's probably much more information processing. And that's actually where the 10,000 hour rule came from. It was a little bit misapplied in the book that came out later. But that is where it initially showed up, was 10,000 hours was kind of seeing some of these expert violinists and chess players and things like that. It's a fascinating, fun book regardless. But I think, again, you're seeing some of these ecological concepts live and breathe in these different places as people are trying to study masterful performers. And we can really pull out, oh, that makes sense why they're seeing that in these expert performers in these ways.
Yeah. I mean, I just keep coming back to in my own head, like, arousal level is so key. And the thing is that needs to be taught. And also it's dynamic because the state of the system is always changing.
Always.
And so even when we're talking about, different intentions you have, you should in some ways have a Rolodex. And this is where it's like, you need to teach guys. And this is the thing where I think coaches are just looking for an easier answer of like, well, I just want it to be like a video game where the guy just, executes the inputs that I put in.
Yeah.
But really the challenge is like teaching, really where I'm at is that this is where it's really difficult, is that the goal of the coach, or I feel like my role, is to actually to teach the players about themselves. They need to learn how to get to know themselves at a very deep, in some ways, intimate level of like, okay, especially how they relate to the environment and all this sort of stuff. Everybody wants like a simple answer and that I've arrived and then I can just go out and play. But for those who have been doing this for a really long time or whatever, it becomes like, okay, I really get to know my system and like, okay, based upon today, this is what I need. This is how I need to interact. Like, I actually need to amp myself up today, or today I actually need to calm myself down, and I need to know what my strategies are that work for me. And so like, for me, this is where it's like, if you give the right principles or the right heuristics, then everything kind of self-organizes around that. You can find the solution. The person can find their individualized solution based upon these principles. And so for me, that's where I think the best coaches are the ones that are able to distill it to, like we had talked about last time, when it comes to the Astros and the success that they had of like, okay, the heuristic is swing at pitches that you think you can do damage on, right? And it allowed guys to find their own unique solutions to that. But that's what all really good coaches do, is they boil things down to these simple principles that get you, that allow for multiple different solutions. But it basically helps guide. So anyways, that's where I think a lot of this comes back to, is like, okay, the truth of the matter is, it's not just, learning all the X's and O's or like all this information out there, but rather it's about your ability to, again, what an ecological principle is telling me is like to be really connected with the athletes in front of me, and then using my principles and converging on and going back to skill as a searching for, and having that skill as a coach to be able to search and to find the solutions for each individual athlete, and then how to coalesce that together into a team. And so, that's where I feel like, again, if I'm going to make a pitch, ecological dynamics, all the ingredients are there to integrate and help find best practices. on that note, anything you want to land the plane on?
I don't think so. I think, the hope and the goal was to set out and identify how maybe at times there can be a dichotomy, right, between process and results. I think we laid out a basic understanding that the result should be informed, or excuse me, the process should be informed by the results we're looking for. But also that process, and what we've constantly come back to, has to be adaptable. It has to be adjustable based on the environment that the athlete is embedded in. And therefore, the environment that the athlete's embedded in practice has to constantly be changing and adapting for them to learn how to search, to become more skillful. I think that's the key piece, is that if we're going to stick to any sort of processes that we think will help give our athletes the results, they have to respect the athlete environment dynamic that's going on, that they're being embedded in that. And that's the proper scale of analysis, not just stick to my plan, execute my pitches, etc. Maybe the last illustration I'll give from a pitching side is, I'm a Braves fan. Happy open day. How'd your Twins do today?
They lost like your Braves. I was following because one of the kids that was at Missouri State while I was there, I got to watch play and work with a little bit. Drake Baldwin, he made their opening day lineup, and so that was really cool to see, and just to see, his growth too. Like, I mean, it's wow. Everybody remarked on like how calm he was, and like just he didn't seem like the moment was too big for him, all that sort of stuff. And that was, having seen him freshman and sophomore year, just to watch the growth. Not that wasn't already there, but like how mature it is now. You're just like, wow, like, yeah. So
my point in bringing up the Braves, Bobby Cox always used to say, I believe it was Bobby, maybe it was his pitching coach, don't question the pitch, question the location. And of course, that isn't true in all situations. And yet, I think undergirding that, maybe the principle underneath that, is exactly what we're talking about. Maybe that pitch was a good pitch, but not for that situation, right? Maybe the location needed to be different because that guy had started to attune to some specifying information, connected to something there, et cetera. That's the adjustments that we're talking about. And I think it lives and breathes in some of the historical coaching that we're seeing. We can bring that back, and we can take a statement like that, and we can say, ultimately, it is about being an adaptable athlete connected to the what is, and figuring out what's a functional fit for that pitch in that situation, in the batter pitcher dynamic.
And even too, with that, going back to the pitch and the location, all that sort of stuff, I think you also have to be able to read swings, right? That's super important. Like, if you need to understand a guy's swing path, all that sort of stuff, and start to look at like, okay, where's their weakness a little bit? And that's where, I've seen some guys struggle and not recognize, like, man, this dude's swing path is basically an arc. And so you throw him breaking balls and you think you got him like 0-2 or whatever. And you flip him a breaking ball and you're basically like throwing the ball right into his swing path. Right. Like, and so like, that's the thing of like, yeah, I mean, sometimes you can locate correctly on these types of players and whatever, and get them to chase and whatnot. And yeah, but if you throw it in the zone, like you're just throwing it, right into their swing arc. And so like, I think that's the other thing pitchers need to understand is like, okay, can you read a hitter's swing arc and like also see where are the holes? Because most guys have a hole based upon how they swing, and you can start to see and pick that up. This is where actually we're going to probably extend this a little bit. I'm curious from your like, what are your thoughts on calling pitches, from the dugout? Because you definitely have a view, and this was true right on the SNC side. I was told, do not stand in one place. Okay. And also work at right angles, because the different angles, right? There's the parallax effect, like, okay, if you're off axis a little bit, you can get fooled, and thinking that like distances are hard to see. So like, I guess my question is like, okay, when I throw BP to guys, I can see different things than if I'm standing behind or off to the side.
Yep.
I mean, standing off to the side is just, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's way different, way different. You're barking at the umpire. Yeah, that was right there. And you go back and you stand back and you look at the video and you're like, oh gosh, that was actually like a couple balls off.
Not even close. For sure.
Yeah. So I'm curious your thoughts though on like calling pitches versus like teaching the pitcher, right? And like giving suggestions. I mean, the watches, right? Like what are your thoughts on like the watches, your experience with the watches? I mean, because the watches almost don't give a like, okay, he doesn't want that pitch. Like, how do you shake that off? Like, I mean, I had conversations even with our guys, like, okay, you want to shake, like, well, what do you do then? Like, you know, like I have ideas, but I'm curious, what are your thoughts? What are your experiences, with like calling pitches and the watches, you know, and being more ecological and like having that sort of framework? Like, what are your thoughts on it and your experience with it?
I created and I've been trying to create principles of my own, and maybe, not maybe, definitely have failed at it. I'm sure in some ways they're either too broad or too specific, and some, and not exactly principles. But part of that's just the journey. I think that's what we're doing here too, like the journey of trying to do this thing to constantly evolve as a coach. So my two principles for our guys this season are number one, I want you to trust in our preparation. Like, we are going to watch all sorts of things. Like, that's my job. My job is to come prepared to call pitches. So I want you to trust my preparation. And then sort of principle, and maybe principle is the wrong word, but like sort of job number two or principle number two is like, your job's to execute, right? Like ultimately, whatever you decide or whatever I decide, your job is to execute that thing. And so that's like the lanes that we start with and that we stay in, so to speak. And then from there, I created a series of rules. And these rules were things like, and I tried to put them in order, things like, you are allowed to shake. Like, when should you shake? Well, you are allowed to shake when you pick up on key information. Either you or the catcher pick up on key information that you can exploit that I don't see. So I need you to stay sensitive and connected. It's actually one thing at times I haven't been crazy about. The little thing is that a lot of times they'll stare. And so I'm noticing guys are slipping back into that, even as we've had conversations, like they're staring instead of like, hey, let's connect. Where's the runner at? Who's the runner? Who's the batter? How can you stay connected? The other thing we put in messages like two choices. And I'll give them two choices so that, because what's important to me is that they have belief and conviction. We do have a your choice in there. I'm speaking to the catcher now. We got that because I wanted to be able to audibly talk to the catcher about different things and what we're trying to do. And so I've tried to make that as open as I can. You know, one of the rules from those principles is like, you're not allowed to shake if you just don't like the pitch, or you're not confident in it, or you just love throwing your favorite pitch all the time, because that's not keeping you connected to the situation. That's not you throwing that pitch because you believe it's a functional fit for the situation. That's you just throwing the pitch because it's your favorite pitch and you want to throw it every time. Now, it doesn't mean we're not going to throw. I had a guy came in relief the other day, threw 13 out of 13 sliders. In fact, I think team we played, I think we brought 3 straight relievers in. We threw something like 47 out of 51 breaking balls. Because it fit. It was just a fit. It was a fit for the situation. So I think those are the things that I'm trying to do to better. I want them to connect more to it, but I will just fully confess, I've always struggled with the idea that like, you shouldn't call pitches and it should be up to the hitter. Like, I think sometimes there's like this Peyton Manning, like everybody should be like him. Nope. Not everybody wants that. I didn't want that as a pitcher. I wanted to be told what to do so I could have full intent and conviction to execute the pitch, put my trust. I wanted, the environment was too chaotic for me. I could never remember previous at-bats because I was so thoroughly embedded in executing that pitch. I could never remember previous at-bats. I needed somebody else to do that for me. So that fit for me well. I know that doesn't fit for everybody. Some guys want more freedom. They get more freedom. Some guys don't want that. They just want to throw what I put down. Some guys aren't very confident in shaking me off yet. And we have conversations after the game. I didn't really like that. Oh, why didn't you shake? I just didn't want to. Oh, well, we have these principles. What did you see? What could you have exploited? Okay, you can be confident. And so for me, it's really, it's up to the individual, but also, there's a reason, and I know that there are good people who disagree with this. There's a reason that offensive coordinators call all the plays and the quarterbacks don't. It's because they get paid and they have more time and they have more experiences and they can help the players be better at that. And yet that doesn't mean, in my opinion, that you don't give the quarterback a modicum of ability to maybe they see something, right? But these are college kids going to school. Like, they don't have time to study hitters as much as I do. Like, to me, it's just foolish to think that there's this argument that it should be one or the other. So I'm really trying to operate as much as I can in the middle of those things. The expectations that I call pitches, that I'm prepared to do it, but how can I also help the athlete stay connected to the situation so they have firm conviction in the pitch, but then also they have a modicum of choice and ooh, I think this will actually work better here. Great, run after it. If you believe it'll work better, and you have firm belief and conviction in that, I would rather have you throw that pitch, because I think that's going to be a better pitch most of the time anyways.
I think that's a good segue for kind of my summary. When it comes to the, process versus results, right? You have to kind of, you want to, when you're setting up your practice environments, you still got to help them stay connected. So you have to actually practice it, right? Whatever your principles are, you have to, your practice environment has to allow for you to work on that. And if it doesn't create spaces for that, then you're going to probably be frustrated with the results that you're going to get, because then you're going to be like, okay, why did the guys not execute on this? Well, it's probably because you went over it one time, you said it one time, but they never got to experience it, explore it, figure out like, okay, this is the time that I need to do it, all that sort of stuff. And so really the practice becomes the game, right? That's where they actually are doing the learning. It's not in practice. So then it becomes, I don't know, for me personally, I'm like, okay, so then what were we doing in practice? And so that's where I would encourage people to think about that, of like, okay, whatever processes you're putting together, the practice environments need to be conducive to eliciting the use of that process. And so for me, that kind of comes back to like when I'm evaluating my practice environments, it's like, okay, did we have enough? Do we create enough opportunities for guys to make adjustments? Was there space, for them to actually, okay, like, because this is the other thing when it comes to umpires, right? What I've heard is you don't make the call right away. It's not like the ball crosses like strike, right? Yep. Or like, the guy, the ball hits the glove and the, whatever, a ball or there's a play at a base. It's not, you don't make the call right away. You pause, you just let it sit for a second, and then you make the call, right? So if that's true of umpires, if we want good calls from umpires, they need to actually create space for them to see, process, and make the call. So then similarly, you need to create space for players to process what the heck just happened, and then actually figure out, okay, maybe shift up their intention, all this sort of stuff. Because I mean, this is the other thing of like cognitive activation, right? You might, David Snowden talked about this. So like there's a bunch of guys getting injured, back injuries, for delivery truck drivers, or, what's the other one? Tow truck drivers, right? So you go from this mode of driving, okay? And then all of a sudden you got to get out and you got to lift something heavy. Your brain is not like, yeah, you might know I need to do this thing, but like cognitively, you haven't fully switched. The whole being hasn't switched to this next task, right? This is even talked about like when it comes to surgeons, et cetera, of like, okay, you go from all of a sudden being this moment of like talking, doing whatever else, and then all of a sudden now you got to get snapped into this thing. Fortunately for doctors, you have all these checklists, you have this whole ritual process. And this is what was being said here, is you have this whole process by which you have this idea, this concept of cognitive activation, right? So you go hand washing, all this sort of stuff starts to transition you and these checklists and all the things that you put on, whatever, starts to transition you into like this other mode. So when it came to like the delivery truck drivers, just putting on a lifting belt, regardless of whether or not the belt actually did anything, it was just like, oh, this is the belt for lifting. You put it on and it cognitively gets you in the mindset of like, I'm about to lift something that might be heavy. You know, I'm not just going to pick it up haphazardly, still thinking about the last thing or whatever it was that I was doing before. We've all experienced this, right? When we transition from like, all right, I'm working on writing a paper and now I need to go deal with my kids, or I just dealt with my kids, now I need to focus on this. Like all of a sudden, like that transition, these different transitions become really hard. And so that's what I'm saying here is you need to create the space for guys to actually make transitions. An adjustment is a transition. So you need to create space for that. And so that's kind of my big thing is if you want to actually have guys work on these different things, you need to create space to allow guys to actually process a little bit so that they can actually intentionally make a change.
And I would add, as we sort of close on this process results, you're probably going to need to help walk them through that as well, because I don't think many athletes, my experience is just simply that they don't do that naturally, and they've never been embedded in environments that are asking them to do that. And so even if you give them the space and they have another at bat or a second set of a live side, whatever, a lot of times they're just going to do the same things over and over, and you might be frustrated and that, hey, I am giving them that space, but they're not taking advantage of it. And so, yeah, whether it's a more organized form question that they do after an outing to be thoughtful about how do I craft my next environment, or in between sets or in between at bats, there's just somebody's going to need to be there to help them even learn that process itself. How do I process this in both helpful and unhelpful ways? And how to identify those things. I think that that's crucially important.
You need to walk the balance of like not doing it for them, not giving them the answers, but at the same point, guiding them through that process. So and that's the other, I'm going to throw this in at the end here. This frustrates me the most about like a big misconception of ecological dynamics is, oh, we just throw them out there and they just got to figure it out. And it's like, no. You still structure things, but you don't handhold the whole entire time. You don't force them, to give the answer that you're looking for, but rather you're guiding them to find the answers themselves. You're teaching them the process, going back to what we were talking before, the process by which you find the answers, the questions, the whatever, and it takes time, right? And this is the thing of like, you may have to rep it. And this is the thing of like, how do you create, this comes back to your practice environments. How do you create space for them to get it wrong so that they're getting the answers wrong more in practice? So you can have that conversation with them of like, okay, you keep getting this result, do you want to keep getting this result? Also too, like, I mean, you kind of talked about it, it's like, all right, if you're going to be like this, it's going to be harder for you to get playing time. All of a sudden, like we get motivated of like, oh, all right, like maybe I need to actually take this a little bit more seriously. Or they go play some games and it's like, okay, you're still not getting the results in the game. Like, so maybe we need to take this whole thing like a little bit more seriously because we already are looking at like the results that we're getting here. So anyways, that would be the things that I leave you guys with. So hopefully you guys enjoyed today's podcast and got something out of it.